our audience is interested in the future of LA, and kind of to preface, our discussion tonight, obviously LA is pretty great, but I think we can agree we want a better LA. That includes building more housing, addressing the affordability issue. We want to continue to grow LA as a center for wealth as well, the trickle-down economics. We want the city to get it right, even if the state is starting to do a little bit more of that and take housing seriously. We don't want to drive away people with, misguided political measures like ULA, some would argue. I think I want to explore the issue tonight of the idea that, there's a little bit of a leadership vacuum in LA right now and what needs to be done with that. So hopefully we'll discuss, some of this on and off the record. And I just want to introduce who I have at the table with me here. We've got Larry Green of Kane Development, biggest project coming to Beverly Hills, 17 acres of the most prime real estate in the country, with One Beverly Hills. We have Aaron Kerman, one of the top brokerages in LA, top team in LA, $1 billion in sales last year. So we hear about the residential side. And Sean Burton, one of the LA heavy hitters in terms of multifamily. Got, one of the only builders at scale right now doing 500 units near LAX. And, you're doing a lot of political stuff as well, too. So I want to hear about that. And if you guys want to jump in, and I might single some of you out, I already told you, with any comments, thoughts, concerns, please do so. We want to hear from you. But I want to talk about something, we'll start off with something, slightly contentious. But Sean and I already talked about this a little bit. The Trump administration's impact on LA real estate. Are you seeing any ICE raids effect on construction sites, tariffs, increasing your building costs? We talked a little bit about this. I think it's been a little muted, actually.
It has. First of all, Stuart, thank you for convening this group, and thank you to The Real Deal. I think it's important. We have so many issues that we get together and we talk about them, and we can band together and make some changes. So I want to thank you for putting this together. I do think it's been muted. I think the bark is worse than the bite. I was in London at a conference a few weeks ago when the National Guard was deployed to Los Angeles, and everybody was saying to me, you okay? Is your family okay? Do we need to shelter you? And I said, look, LA is, 500 square miles, and this is like 5 blocks that this is happening. But the media plays it up as it's this huge tragedy, even though there were real challenges with what happened there. We were very concerned as a builder about tariffs, right? I mean, there's especially after Liberation Day on April 2nd. But, as we talked to all of our subcontractors and material providers, again, it turned out that the bark was a lot worse than the bite. And I think we saw some national numbers on this, too, that the actual impact of project cost was about 2% from the tariffs at their kind of worst. And we haven't seen in our projects issues with ICE raids. We had one of our subcontractors on another project who had 300 people working on a project. There was a raid, and 4 of the 300 were arrested. So again, I think these are real issues, and they're serious issues. I'm not trying to minimize them, but I do think often we have to look at the scale and scope of what's actually happening.
Yeah. And Larry, are you seeing any effects there on tariff costs and that sort of thing?
No, I mean, look, I think the tariff, sort of discussion does sort of just create a lot of noise and sort of uncertainty in the market that you're sort of constantly sort of trying to measure and see what's happening. But as I was talking with some of the folks earlier, I mean, what can you do about it, right? You sort of have to sort of just keep your head down and keep going. We're developing for the long term, not sort of a moment in time. And so if you have that sort of mindset, it seems to work. Certainly, we've not had any sort of experience with any ICE raids. Same kind of thing where I had friends calling me, "Are you okay? What's going on there? Are you all right?" I'm like, "I'm in Beverly Hills. Like, it looks great out here. I don't know." But there was a lot of that, and I think just that noise of sort of negative energy. What's going on in LA? And it really sort of was hiding all the good things that are happening. And certainly, you came out of the fires was tough news. Then rolling into the ICE raids was tough. But if you really look at sort of, FIFA coming, World Cup coming to LA, the Olympics coming to LA, Super Bowls and All-Star games and Lucas Museums and everything that's going on in the museum districts and all the entertainment, there's really a lot of real positive things. And so we're just trying to leverage on that and talk about that.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I mean, obviously there's a negative big city narrative happening right now, whether you're DC or Chicago or anywhere else, right? Yeah. So I think that's, to be combated. But Sean, you and I were talking about this a little bit. There might be, interesting enough, like an opportunity at the national level for housing. It was an interesting idea you mentioned. So Sean is part of the Real Estate Roundtable, very influential DC group. It's got, Blackstone and BlackRock and all these guys kind of shaping policy behind the scenes. But you were saying one thing you're kind of talking about is like, are there moonshot ideas that we can come with on the real estate front that will get President Trump's attention, and maybe there'll be a push to doing something bigger? Like, that's an interesting idea.
Look, I think that's the hope. I mean, there's clearly a recognition at the local level, the state level, the national level that there's a housing crisis. And I think there's something like 7 million fewer housing units in this country than we need, and half of those are in California, half of that gap. And so I think the hope is, you have a developer in the White House,
right.
That there'll be an opportunity for some national policy, maybe to override some of the state and local policies that would make it challenging to build housing. And I think there's potentially provisions in the tax bill that was just passed as well that can spur development and new housing. So I think that's the hope.
Yeah. What are the tax provisions that are most notable to you?
There's tax provisions around depreciation and expensing, and just encouraging more investment, which I think is something in the business community we do like to see. There's things we don't like about it too, but I think from that perspective we like to see encouraging investment.
Yeah. Aaron, I want to ask you, because I want to get into the bête noire, the thorn in the side of LA real estate, ULA, and I want to talk a little bit about what happened in the past week with that. But are you still seeing buyers that are disgruntled about that? Is that still impacting residential deals? How is that kind of factoring in, and what are you seeing in the market now?
Buyers and sellers are absolutely disgruntled over ULA, and it is not going away, and it's actually getting worse every day. When you are doing these deals, and sellers can be charged anywhere between 4.5% and 5% additional fees on top of commissions and closing costs and everything else, it's make it or break it for a lot of these developers, not only on the luxury level, but for apartments, for retail, and everything in the middle. So it's a real problem. It's been really challenging. It's continuing to be challenging. And they really need to fix it, because it's the crutch of the issues today when we're selling anything residential, even commercial. It comes up, and it really has probably stopped 50% of the deals, maybe even more.
Wow.
I did an analysis that showed we are down 65% in transactional volume from pre-ULA to today. Now, I'm sure there's other factors, interest rates and other things, but it's a huge problematic issue in our world.
Yeah, and that's residential sales. I mean, it's been documented, the apartment constructions declined in the last 3 years since ULA.
And a lot of these developers have, 5 to 10% margin a lot of the time, especially when you're doing apartment buildings and other non-luxuries. So it's very impactful. And I think until we figure out a way to get rid of that, we're not going to see some mega change.
Yeah, and I think it seems like, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but ULA is kind of the linchpin of so many of the issues in LA right now. And also it speaks to the industry mobilization against it, and how effective the real estate lobby is. But it was interesting this past week where ULA got introduced, the Karen Bass bill at the state level, and it was, I guess, to preempt a broader repeal of ULA, but then the Bass bill was pulled back. Do you want to get into how that happened and what that means for the ULA fight?
I think we were very close. We were within 24 hours of at least getting an exemption in the first 15 years for new development, and the idea was to encourage investment, to encourage more housing. There was also in that bill a 5-year exemption for people who lost their home in the Palisades. So if they rebuild, they wouldn't have to pay this big tax on top of it. That was something the mayor insisted on. That was important to her. And then in what happens in Sacramento, there's horse trading, and the drafting got messed up, and it was pulled at the last minute. The mayor said publicly that she's going to bring it up the first week of January because she's really concerned about getting new housing and investment here. So I hope it happens, and I'm going to work on it a lot as well, a lot of people in this room, to try to make that happen so we can get housing and new investment in LA again.
Yeah. Was that a misstep that it had to get pulled back like that, or some of the drafting issues were off, or what was the deal with that?
Yeah, I think I think frankly I had a front row seat to this. I think the mayor did her part. She worked very hard to get it passed. She made something like 75 to 100 calls in the last 72 hours trying to persuade people, but She's not in the legislature anymore. There's authors who draft, and there were some fatal flaws, I think. But there's a willingness, from the governor. There's a willingness from the governor and from the many members of the legislature and the mayor, a recognition that new housing construction is fundamentally stopped in Los Angeles because of ULA.
Right.
And that you need to fix it. They're not going to repeal it, unfortunately, but that you need to fix it in order to get things. And so now that we have that recognition, the hope is we can actually get something done.
So Mayor Bass is obviously in that direction. The city council is still not on board with that general.
Yeah, look, I think when you talk to city council members and others, I think they don't believe that ULA is slowing housing. They think it's interest rates, they think it's ICE raids, they think it's tariffs. They don't believe that it's slowing housing, and we've been working to provide data, and UCLA has done 2 studies, and UC Irvine did a study, and they're trying to provide the data showing that this has a causal effect.
Yeah.
But I think we need everybody in the industry to be talking to their council members and explaining this and pushing, because it's not going to happen otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. And recently there was $400 million released as part of the ULA program that they've amassed in taxes. We've got Dan Eukelson of the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. Dan, you were saying your concerns about some of that $400 million is it's not all going to go to building housing.
Well, a big chunk of that is going to enrich attorneys to help tenants who are facing a big chunk of that is going to enrich attorneys who are going to help tenants that are facing evictions for whatever violation that might have occurred under their lease agreement. Some of it would hopefully go to rental assistance, which is more direct relief to tenants. But I don't have hopes, and this is coming from a former planning commissioner in Beverly Hills, I don't have hopes that the city of LA could build anything reasonably efficiently at all. And that's why our organization has joined forces with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association to try to overturn Measure ULA. It's just bad legislation.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that is kind of an interesting thing. It seemed like, for years the far left was equating building with gentrification. Then there seemed to be a pivotal moment. I would maybe put it around the time that Kamala Harris said, hey, we need to build 1 million housing units. The far left seemed to come on board with building housing, but it was like AOC writing an op-ed in the New York Times saying the government needs to build all that housing, which is is the government really going to be able to do that? So that seems like
Look, the way to solve the affordability crisis in California is through more supply. Being 5.5% behind the 8 ball the minute you stick a shovel in the ground is not the solution to doing that.
Yeah. And do you think the real estate industry needs to do a better job? I mean, it's interesting to me in LA because it seems like a lot of the trade groups are a little bit spread all over the map, and there's not really one kind of unified trade group response to some of this stuff. Is that something you guys agree with, or is that could there be more coordination happening?
Yeah,
I think we've done a horrible job of unifying and coming together. We're really good about unifying when something happens and bad legislation happens. All of a sudden we mobilize, but we really need to do a better job of mobilizing prior to extremely detrimental law and really, in my opinion, and somebody that's on the ground every day, it really has made selling real estate in LA very challenging, not only from a numbers standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint, because the majority of developers are saying, why do I need to be in LA if I could just go right outside of city limits and not be behind by 5%? And so we have developers that would love to develop in LA, that do develop in LA, and are just saying until ULA gets off the books or changed substantially, they're not going to do it. And it's also a fundamental issue on not only the numbers, but the basis for the psychology behind it. And that people struggle with that as well, because, it was claim the mansion tax, stick it to the rich, give it to the people that need. And again, we're all types of people that we want additional housing. We want to solve our homeless problem. But we also have to recognize that growth and development is how cities stay alive.
Right.
And if we're not staying alive, we're technically dying.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to the point, with your project, Larry. It's not like an either or, it's not like either you build affordable housing or you build for the rich. Ideally you want to be doing both, right? And, your One Beverly project is the ultimate project of building for the wealthy that presumably will have a trickle-down effect, to use that old economic term, right? I think that you can still use that term. But I mean, you know, you want to draw that global wealth to LA, obviously, right? I mean, that's so key. I'm curious because you do projects in Brickell, you do projects in Palm Beach, you do projects on Billionaires Row. Like, how does LA stack up in terms of, like, you know, the uber wealthy and its position in kind of the you know, that ecosystem these days, and has it changed over time as you've seen it?
Well, look, I think for us, we probably need to distinguish between the city of Beverly Hills and the city of Los Angeles. You know, the city of Beverly Hills, in our mind, is an outlier, so they've been very responsive to us. You know, we got our permissions within sort of 12 months of sort of coming up with the plan. The city's dedicated serious resources to be able to sort of accommodate our permitting and inspections. I mean, the city of Beverly Hills has been dynamite. I do think there's lessons to be learned by sort of what's going on in Miami, because they actually suffered from some of the same issues, but then real estate sort of coalesced around each other, created sort of a forum where a singular message could be put to the politicians so that they could understand the key issues and so that they could react to it. And we sort of need that here. I mean, we have done a terrible job. We're getting our butts kicked by, you know, Kurt Peterson and Unite Here, and you know, we need to get organized and we need to start, you know, working it. And it's a little challenging. You know, we're sitting in Beverly Hills. I don't really have standing to go lobby, you know, the city of Los Angeles. But of course, what goes on in the city of LA impacts us.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we'd be happy to support that, but we do need to do a better job.
Yeah. What was the mechanism in Miami by which the developers
You know,
coalesced
they
there?
They basically created a group that sort of a significant real estate members that put money up, put resources, put an organization together that could sort of just focus the message. And I know we can do that. I've been out talking to people really in the past 6 months. We've been sort of really talking to people about this. And I think there's a play there, but I think we need everybody to sort of get on board and really help.
Yeah, I think the thing that works against LA obviously is just the you know,
size.
immensity and the
Yeah, the
sprawl of it,
size.
right? I mean, you're just
Yeah.
talking about a diffuseness inherently, right?
It is
Yeah.
challenging. Yeah.
But case in point,
Yeah.
we have a lot of buyers that will only buy in Beverly Hills right now.
Right.
Because they know that the policy is good,
Yeah.
they know that the security is
Yeah.
good, and they know that they don't have to deal with things like ULA.
Yeah.
And Beverly Hills has been the winner,
Yeah.
and the city of LA has not.
Yeah. Well, one person that Beverly Hills hasn't been as nice to is Leo Piskolnikov. Right there. Leo, do you want to? But to your credit, you're pushing through with all your projects, including the one in Beverly Hills. Do you want to tell us the status there and how, you know, what's next, and also just your first shovel in the ground builder's remedy project, because I think that's a really telling thing of the state mandate, you know, working through the process.
Well, I have 5 in Beverly Hills, actually. And, well, the other 4, the Beverly Hills pretty much has no problem with their processing. We're going through the tribal based on the new SB 130, which is due, I think, in the next 2 weeks. And then Linden is with council tonight, so we'll see what they do. Yeah.
And then your first builder's remedy project, you were saying that's actually going to come out of the ground is in Santa Monica, and that's actually shovel ready now?
Yeah, so that's in Santa Monica. It was of the 17 that were submitted, it was the only one that was approved as a builder's remedy. It was next to the hospital. It made sense. So,
Yeah.
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 I think what you're doing is the most important thing happening in the broader city, quite honestly. You know, you really have shaken it up, and you're getting people. I sit with the council people, and they're afraid, right? Oh my God, builder's remedy, we got to do something, we got to do something. It's been dynamite. I mean, without you sort of doing what you're doing, people would be still twiddling their fingers, worrying about stuff. Now stuff is happening because of you've taken initiative and you're going for it, and it's creating a carrot and stick approach. It's like, guys, either get on board and do something, or you know what, we're going to figure out another way. And it's been dynamite.
Yeah, it's the Roosevelt approach, speak softly and carry the big stick. But, I mean, Beverly Hills is doing it to themselves. They had an opportunity to just have Linden.
Yeah.
And they refused to cooperate, and now they have 12 projects. And as I made it clear to them last week, that if they refuse to cooperate again, they'll follow the path of Redondo, which recently lost It's housing element certification, which the tentative rather, the final court ruling should be November 3rd. So yeah.
Well, I also want to talk about another state development that just happened in the past week, SB 79, where you can build more in transit areas. Sean, how big an impact do you think that's going to have on projects you're doing?
So, you know, the lawyers are analyzing it because it's a little bit ambiguous legislation, but it appears to be pretty impactful to be able to build mid-ride housing basically by right within, you know, quarter mile or half mile of transit without labor requirements. And it follows on the CEQA bill that was passed in the end of June, really making kind of mid-rise infill construction exempt from CEQA. So those are two big steps forward that we think are going to have a pretty profound impact on development everywhere but Los Angeles.
And by labor requirements, you mean, yeah, right. There you go.
Unfortunately.
There you go. And labor requirements, that means what, union, non-union,
It means,
or
requiring
wage?
prevailing wage, and so basically for both of the bills, our understanding is above 85 feet high rise, you have to go union, but below, there's no
Right.
labor requirements. People could still choose to do a PLA for other reasons, but it won't be required.
Yeah, and that's pretty significant, right?
It's very significant, it's less expensive,
Yeah.
so.
Cool. Well, I want to get into fire rebuilding a little bit. And Sean, I know you had something going on in Altadena. Do you want to talk about what you're doing there?
Sure. So we wanted to do something to be helpful post-fires, and we were doing a lot of charity and nonprofit and civic work. We said, how can we kind of put the business to work to help it? And we're in the development business, and we don't do single-family homes now, but we've done, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 over the course of the firm, so or the firm's history. So we decided, after talking to people in Altadena, that we were going to stand up a home builder, not to buy lots or invest, but to actually help people as a service provider. And you know, people were concerned. They were emotionally distraught who've lost their homes. They weren't experienced with building homes. They're very concerned about time, about getting taken advantage of, about quality. So we made a decision we created 24 different floor plans and went to the county and had those pre-approved so we could shave 3-4 months off the project. We could price them better by building at scale, and then give people a 1-year kind of delivery guarantee and a price guarantee, so they don't have to worry about cost overruns or tariffs or other things like that. Kind of remove a lot of the stress from the project. So yeah, we called the Genesis Home Builders, and we just launched a few weeks ago, and 16 of the 24 floor plans are approved by the county, and the other 8 I think will be approved by the end of this week, early next week, and we've just signing our first customer. So we're excited to be part of the solution in Altadena, and our clients are happy because we've just tried to remove a lot of stress from and kind of a lot of stress from the process.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like with the rebuilding, between what you're doing and robotics and modular building and 3D printing houses and all the different innovations that are happening. I mean, it's interesting that it's happening in LA because if there's a natural disaster and it's in the Panhandle of Florida, like how much technological change are you going? Like this is a thing that's going to be used in other natural disaster areas, I would imagine, learning the lessons here,
We hope so, and and a lot of people outside of LA don't realize the scale of what's happened. My brother was a firefighter with LAFD for 37 years, and he had always grown up, told me about the fire in Bel Air in 1961, which had fundamentally changed fire codes and response times and systems and everything else because it was such a big impact, and there was 484 homes lost in that fire versus 12,000. Wow. Just the scope of this is, and the Red Cross, I was with the head of the Red Cross a few weeks ago, and they were saying there's 7 levels of disaster, 1 through 7, and then 7 being the worst. And there's only been 3 level 7 disasters in the history of the U.S. Hurricane Maria, which destroyed Puerto Rico, Hurricane Katrina, and the LA wildfires in terms of scope. So there's just a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. Well, I want to turn to another person in the audience, Sean Avenham, who's a big builder himself, had a home in Malibu that was destroyed by the fire. And, so you've experienced it obviously from the personal and the professional level. Do you want to talk about your experiences and what, that kind of says about rebuilding? And I think you said you're not rebuilding,
Correct.
Right?
So Malibu is doing everything wrong, not surprising. They took the governor's order, which was pretty simple: let them build quick, and let them build 10% more than what they had. and they put so many regulations on it, I'm sure they're going to get sued at some point. But at this point, I mean, if you look at the I think it was 2018, the prior fire, only 30-some% of the homes were built since then. My feeling is this time it's going to be even worse, and especially on the beach that they lost over 300 homes, and one of the homes was ours, and my wife was shocked when I told her we're not going to rebuild. And she said, "What do you mean? It's your business." I said, "We're not going to rebuild. Life is too short." So they're doing everything wrong. LA is doing completely the opposite, in my opinion, and it's because the people in building and safety, especially, are the right people and they have the right vision.
Mm-hmm. And what would you change? What, regulatory wise or in practice? What would be the solve for that?
If they just follow the governor's order, which was pretty simple, people will rebuild. They just don't understand. They added requirement that per home in Malibu probably will cost between $2 to $3 million just in foundation and septic and seawall, which killed majority of the homes on the beach that could be rebuilt. And just touching on what you said earlier about the industry here, I've been involved with some of the guys around the table, and we don't have an industry here. It doesn't exist, guys. And we need to do better, because we let the other side control what's going on here, and here we are. And you're right, every time there is an issue, we try to come together, but there is no one group that's really pushing forward.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like the interesting thing, and Dan and I were talking about this for a second, was, trade groups also just don't have a great social media presence. And then if you look at like the far left right now or the far right, great social media messaging, but business groups in general don't have great social media messaging. And I think that's, where you lose some of the audience right there, and you lose the middle, So I think that's obviously of a piece with the trade group, building up a solid trade group. Consolidation is the social media messaging, Well, I want to ask one more question. I think we're coming up on time, unless people want to jump in. But I thought it was instructive to talk about Miami for a second and what they did there. One of the other thorn in the sides of California is Texas, which no red tape, right? But Sean, you build in Texas. Chris from Laterra builds in Texas. I want to ask you guys, like, what have you seen that they do in Texas that LA should emulate? Like one kind of just like policy thing or kind of logistical thing?
So I'll say this: it's hard to develop everywhere. It's not easy anywhere, and even in Texas. I mean, in fact, there's had to be some state legislation recently forcing cities to do more development. I'll actually talk about San Diego. San Diego has been. You have a mayor there who's very focused on development. He realizes that housing affordability issues are caused by not enough supply, as we talked about. And he created something called the Complete Communities Plan. And you're able to get comments every time you turn something in. In 30 days, you have comments. They've basically done a master environmental impact report, so you can tier off it, and you don't have you can't get the same sort of challenges against it. So it's really spurred a development boom in San Diego. And so I think that's a great example of like an elected official who saw a problem, who had to forge compromise with labor and with the communities and neighborhoods, but is doing it to get housing built, and I think you're seeing the results there.
And are they staffed up at a increased level, or it's just the policies they put in place that really?
It's just the culture's different. Like they call you a customer and a client. I mean, when was the last time you went to county at LA City and they called you a customer? And they're good to their word. You put these 30-day requirements, and every single time they come back with comments, and so we're able to entitle things at a much faster pace, which is drawing investment from all over the country there. So.
Yeah. And Chris, what have you seen?
Yeah, I would say that, ultimately as a developer, we want to do what the capital wants to do. And the capital currently perceives LA to be no longer a core market. And the reason is because of this regulatory risk, right? They're worried about taxes. They're worried about rent control, things like Measure ULA. And as a result, capital perceives that as too risky. And so they're wanting to go to markets like Texas. I think I said in a recent article with you guys in LA, like the math ain't mathing, right? And that's a function in large part of ULA. But that's that's kind of how we're seeing the world. But we like LA. I mean, therein lies the opportunity with supply constraints, right? Because if it were easy, anybody would do it. And that's one of the reasons I think we like LA.
Right.
So.
The flip side of that supply issue is
Exactly.
right, is supply
Yep.
constraint, which is also
Yeah,
not a bad thing either.
Yeah, we're crazy enough to
Yeah.
bang our head on the wall and figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I want to wrap it up there because we got to eat dinner, and I'm glad to make you guys all work for your dinner tonight. So thank you for coming out and having this discussion. It was great to try it for the first time. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.